So a reminder that we have this page from a 1611 King James Bible. We're going to give that away in our drawing. And if you are here tonight, then you can put in another entry in our drawing. Draw your name. So go back there to the table by the 7-minute party. Write your name on the slip of paper. Open up the box and put your name in there. So you can do that now over the next 45 minutes. You can go back there and add your name if you want to. And so get this page. Also, I'm going to pass around these two pages together on purpose because as we go through this, you'll see this is a page from a 1611 King James Bible, and this is a page from, I can't remember the year, 15, I can't remember. This is from the Bishop's Bible. The King James translation, as we'll see, is a revision of the Bishop's Bible. And I purposely bought these two pages because these cover the same passages. Both of these pages cover Isaiah 18 and 19. And so, so you can look at the comparison and how they look side by side. And so, so this one here that has a little bit larger print or takes up more space, that's the King James. And then here you have the Bishop's Bible that you can look at it to compare. So I'll start that around, and you can look at that. And then I have this other page that I'll start over here. This is from a King James Bible from 1650. This is the title page from the book of Hebrews. And so you can look at it. And so on these ones that are original pages, you can still see the marginal notes that they don't put in the King James Bibles anymore. But you can look at those. So you can look at that and see front and back on there. And then here, this is just a facsimile. Of course, it's small. It's not near as big, obviously, as those pages. It still has the marginal notes and the old spelling and everything, but it has the preface in the front and all the other stuff that they added to the front, the calendars and all that kind of thing. And you might have to have your eyeglasses to read that, but I'll pass that around for you. So I got 7 pages of notes. So ready, set, go about the King James Bible and the translation. So obviously there's a lot that can be said, and usually this is a 2-parter, but we're going to try to do it in 40 minutes. So to sum it up, we're going to start with the setting that led to the King James Bible. So King James the Sixth of Scotland, he came to the throne in England as King James I in 1603, and in January of 1604, he held a conference at Hampton Court with the Anglicans and the Puritans. And of course, when you have a state church, the Anglican Church, the Church of England was the state church. And when you have a state church, the king or whoever is the monarch is over the church. So the bishops, the priests, the elders and so on, they ultimately answer to the king. And so this is how this works. And so King James, he comes to the throne, but there's some dissension and there's some disagreement, especially between the Anglicans, the Church of England bishops, and the Puritans. And so in an attempt to kind of bring people together, the king holds a 2-day conference at Hampton. And so the Puritans had some issues because they felt that the changes of the Reformation had not gone far enough. and that more changes needed to be made. And so at this conference, the leadership was Richard Bancroft, who was the Bishop of London, and he did lead the effort for the Church of England, and John Reynolds was the speaker for the Puritans. And they were not as well represented in number. There were a lot of course, bishops represented from the Church of England. And then, of course, King James, he presided over this. And by what the records that exist from what King James wrote and the recordings of what took place, King James was really a little snarky to both sides, but the Puritans didn't get almost anything that they wanted. They were upset with the way things were going with the Anglican Church, and they did not like it. They didn't like all the vestments and the dress of the clergy. They felt like it was still too Catholic. They didn't appreciate that. They didn't appreciate all the hierarchy with elders and bishops and deacons and priests and all that. They didn't appreciate that. They didn't appreciate infant baptism. They felt like that should have changed. They didn't appreciate the big, strong emphasis on the Eucharist, on communion. They didn't appreciate that. So there were all these things that they didn't like and they wanted changed. And but the king, he was fine with all that. On the second day of the conference, John Reynolds suggested that there be a new translation of the Bible made. And that was the only thing that perked up King James's ears. And he was like, I'm interested now. And the reason that King James was interested in a new translation of the Bible was the bishop's Bible was the Bible that was authorized for use in the church, but the people didn't use it. The people didn't like it. The people liked the Geneva Bible, but King James didn't like the Geneva Bible. Yes, ma'am?
Are these still in Latin?
No, these were English translations. So Geneva Bible, English translation, Bishop's Bible, English translation. And of course, we looked at all those last week. And so we had these complaints. So what was it about the Bishop's Bible that they didn't like? The people believed that the Bishop Bible was clumsy. They didn't like the translation. One of the examples, the classic example, is Ecclesiastes 11:1, that we know as cast your bread upon the water, right? In the Bishop's Bible it said, lay thy bread upon wet faces, and so thou shalt find it after many days. And people are like, what? And so anyway, all these things, all these phraseology in the Bishop's Bible, and so the people are just like, no, we're not using the Bishop's Bible. We like the Geneva Bible. And of course, the Geneva Bible, that's the Bible that came over on the Mayflower. It was popular among the people. We talked about it last week. The Geneva Bible, the king didn't like the Geneva Bible because of the marginal notes. And his main complaint about the marginal notes was that the translators in their marginal notes made it sound like that it was okay to disobey the king. So, for example, in Exodus 1:19, the marginal note said, their disobedience herein was lawful, but their dissembling evil. The word dissembling here means concealing their true motives. Exodus 1:19 is talking about the midwives who disobeyed Pharaoh when they were told to kill the male children. And so the translators made a commentary in the margin that said their disobedience here was lawful, right? in disobeying the king and not committing murder, basically is what they're saying. And then the second, or not the second example, another example was 2 Chronicles 15:16. Actually, if you read verse 13 and 16, this is talking about the king's mother who was committing idolatry. When you read the whole passage here is what it's talking about. And the marginal note in this passage says this, or grandmother. And herein he showed, the king in 2 Chronicles, he showed that he lacked zeal, for she ought to have died, both by the covenant, as verse 13, and by the law of God. But he gave place to foolish pity, and would also seem after a sort to satisfy the law. And so when you read 2 Corinthians 15:16, he just reprimanded her and punished her, but he didn't kill her for her idolatry, which they're saying in according to the law of Moses, that was what should have been done. But he didn't want to kill his mother. And so the translators in their marginal notes, and then there were things that they said negatively, for example, in the New Testament about Herod, which you can see why they would say something negative about Herod. And so King James didn't like the marginal notes that the translators of the Geneva Bible would say. And so King James was like, okay, this is good. Let's make a new translation. I'm all for it. So then the third thing that the Puritans, they didn't like about the bishop's translation was the ecclesiastical words. Like Tyndale, in his translation, and the Geneva Bible, in their translation, they would use the word congregation, whereas the bishop's Bible would use the word church. And the Puritans were like, we need to use the word church, or use the word congregation, right? That's where the authority lies, is in the congregation, not in the church, as in the state church, right? The Anglican church. They wanted to use the word wash, not the word baptize, because the Greek word baptizo means to immerse or submerse. But the Church of England guys were like, no, we're not translating it that way. We're going to transliterate. In other words, we're going to make an English word. Because if we translate it baptize, then it can be any mode we want it to be. Right? It can be sprinkle, it can be pour, it can be squirt you with a squirt gun, it can be whatever. So we're not going to translate it, we're going to transliterate it. And the Puritans were against that. The Puritans wanted the Greek word, and I would mispronounce it if I tried to say it, presbyteros or whatever. They wanted it translated elder or senior. Of course, we know they didn't get their way. In your King James Bible, we know it. It keeps saying what? Bishop. Because bishop is an office in the Anglican Church. So the Anglican Church, all the bishops, they got their way. And the Puritans preferred the word minister over the word priest. So these were the complaints. And so King James was like, yep, this is great. Let's have a new translation. And so Bancroft, he is the one that got to pick the men on the committee. And so on the committee were 48 Anglicans and 5 Puritans. Now, one of the things that made the King James translation completely different than the other translations was it was done by a committee. All the other translations up to this point had been the effort of one man, like Wycliffe or Tyndale or Coverdale, or just a group of people, a small group of people working together. But now we have a translation that's being done by, if you would want to say, two denominations and a large committee of people working together. And they were divided up, even though the Puritans were not largely represented. There were only 5 of them, and they didn't get any of their requests. But they were divided into 6 companies, and within those 6 companies, they all worked on different sections of the Bible. And, of course, they started this in 1604, and we know it was not completed until 1611. So they worked on it for 7 years. They put a lot into it, even though it was a revision. And so they worked on it for a long time, and when they would finish their section, at least according to the rules, then they were supposed to send it to the other companies. And the men in those other companies were to check it. And so then there was a team, like I think it was maybe 9, from these translators. There were 9 on a revision team that looked at everything. And then Bancroft made the final revision. And it is our understanding that he revised it 14 times. Now, nobody knows for sure what all he did, because many of the notes and records have been lost. But it's understood that he made 14 final revisions. So, the translation. Now, there were 15 rules given to the translation team, but we're mainly going to just quickly look at 3 of them. Rule number 1, the ordinary Bible read in the church, commonly called the bishop's Bible, to be followed, and as little altered as the truth of the original will permit. Now, for me personally, this was a big eye-opener several years ago, 12, 14 years ago, 15 years ago, when I began my journey into how we got the Bible. Because I was on the fringes of a system, or of a group of King James onlyism, who on some level of it, they teach that the King James translation is the only word of God for English-speaking people, and that it's the only one. There is none other. And so when I began to research this, and I discovered that the King James translation was a revision of the Bishop's Bible, it blew my mind. Because the people who promote the idea of King James onlyism, they know this, but they never say it. The way that they imply it is that the King James translators sat down with blank paper and started a brand new translation. That's how they just let you think it. That's how they just lead you to believe it, or at least that was my experience, right? And so that was my experience, is that they just all sat down with blank paper with Hebrew and Greek and did a brand new translation. And I'm like, what? They used the Bishop's Bible and as little as altered it as possible. And you can go online, because many years ago, they found in a library a bishop's Bible that has the translator's notes in it, the King James translators. They scratched this out and rewrote this and inserted this and said, we think this ought to be changed. And I'm like, what? They didn't start fresh. It was a revision of the bishop's Bible. Anyway, that's just a personal thing. Rule number 2. The names of the prophets and the holy writers with the other names of the text to be retained as nigh as may be according as they are vulgarly or commonly used. Now, if you have a King James Bible, you know that they didn't follow this rule very well. It'd be really nice if they had, but sometimes your Bible says Isaiah, sometimes it calls him Isaiah. Sometimes it calls the prophet Jeremiah, sometimes it calls him Jeremy. So they didn't do a very good job of following that rule. Whatever, we know who they're talking about. Okay, rule number 3. This is the rule that the Puritans didn't like. The old ecclesiastical words to be kept, namely the word church, not to be translated congregation, and so on. And so they made sure they mentioned that one specifically, right? Don't mess with that. Don't change it to congregation. And so how I wish they wouldn't have done that. Anyway, how about the language of the King James Bible? So when we come to the language of the King James Bible, people like to talk about, well, I can't understand the language of the King James Bible. It's archaic, right? Okay, yes. And in some ways, it was somewhat archaic, even at the time that they translated it, because by the mid-16th century, people didn't talk using, for example, ye and you and thou and thee. That had fallen into disuse.
So in your King James Bible, you're going to find the ye's and the you's and the thees and the thous. And sometimes people say, well, I don't understand the these and the thous. And the reason that the King James translation uses ye and you and thee and thou is pretty simple. Ye and you is always plural. Thee and thou is always singular. And one of the ways that you can remember this is that when you write a Y, there's two, uh, you write a Y with two lines at the top. So you can remember two or more is plural. And when you write a T, there's one line at the top, singular. And so ye and you is plural, and thee and thou is singular. Whereas today we use the word you for a singular and plural. But when you're reading in your King James translation, then you can always readily identify whether it's singular or plural. And there are some places in, especially in your New Testament, where this is clear. There's a clear division, especially right in one verse. So one example of this is in John chapter 3 and verse number 7, when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus. And Jesus says, marvel not that I said unto thee, ye must be born again. Or in other words, marvel not that I'm telling you, singular, that you all, everyone, must be born again. And so in a modern translation, it probably says something similar to marvel not that I say unto you, you must be born again. And so you would not readily notice that one is singular and one is plural. Now, if your translation has good footnotes, it would tell you in the footnotes, this one is singular and this one is plural. And so, but reading in your King James translation, you would be able to immediately recognize what is singular and one is plural. There is another example of that. I believe it's in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11, when Jesus says, blessed are ye when men shall revile you. And so, anyway, throughout the scripture, especially in the New Testament, you can identify whether it's singular or whether it's plural. And so, in your modern translation, you rely on the footnotes for it to tell you this is singular or this is plural. And so, but because of language change, we don't talk that way. And they didn't even really talk that way in the 1600s, but the King James translators used that to be able to identify the singular and the plural. Even in the 1800s, only 200 years after the King James translation had been done, Noah Webster himself recognized that language had changed, the English language had changed, and he wanted to make a new translation. He did make a new translation, but it just didn't gain any ground. So, language changes, and so, uh, and this is the reason that new translations are done. And so, uh, next in your notes is it talks about the style and as a goal of the translators. And so their goal was that the translation be understood by the common person. And so one of the things that you will notice in your King James translation is that they had a preference for using single syllable words. And there are a lot of single syllable words, and they just wanted it to be smooth and to have a poetic rhythm as it was read and make it easy to be read aloud. And they would do a lot of this kind of testing. And so often they would go into groups and read it aloud and let the group listen to it. How does this sound when being read aloud? Because, of course, the Bible was designed to be read aloud in the congregation, in the church, because not a lot of people could afford to have a Bible. Not everyone was literate. And so you would go to church and you would hear the Bible be read aloud in groups and in congregations in churches. So how did it sound to be read aloud? Another one of their purposes was the theology. Now we've talked about this a little bit, but of course, this theology in the King James translation had a bias towards the Anglicans. This is not surprising. The great majority of the translators were Church of England men. They were Anglicans. And it doesn't matter what translation you have, it's going to have a bias. And you just can't help that. And men are going to do their best. Translators are going to do their best to just translate it. What does it say in the original languages? But the Church of England men have their own bias. And so you remember there was rule number 4, which said the ordinary Bible read in the church, commonly called the bishop's Bible, was to be followed and as little altered as the truth of the original would permit. And so the Puritans were not a big fan of rule number 4 because they didn't want so much to follow the bishop's Bible as they wanted to follow the original Greek and Hebrew and so on. So anyway, they had an issue a little bit with some of the theology, as we've mentioned, when it comes to the word church or the word baptize, and some of these different areas. And one of the difficulties that they had was, an example is the word spirit. Should the word spirit be capitalized? And when looking at the context of the verses they were translating, is this talking about the Spirit of God, or is it talking about the spirit of man? And so they would often have a lot of discussion about that. And so you've probably noticed in whatever translation you read, sometimes the word spirit might be capitalized, and then other times it may not be, even when comparing translations. So this is one of those things that translators have to work through. Another one of the prominent debates at the time was between was about predestination. And so it boiled down to the distinction they were trying to make between foreknowledge and predestination.
The Church of England bishops were Calvinists. So they had their own bias. And so the truth of the matter is, if a committee of men, just exactly like the King James translators today, were making a revision of the Bible, we probably would be completely against it. Say, well, they have this bias that we disagree with. But anyway, moving along from that. The printing of the King James Bible. The first edition of the King James was printed in 1611 by Robert Barker, the King's printer. He had the right to publish all Bibles in England in English. It was expensive to do. He died a pauper. But there were two editions published in 1611, and of course, they were full of mistakes, like spelling errors and punctuation errors and all kinds of issues, and they were constantly being updated. And so, because of all those types of errors, and in 1760, Oxford and Cambridge worked together to produce a standard updated text, and then this was done again by Oxford in 1769, and most of your King James Bibles today are the 1769 text. So when they finally got it all uniform, all the spelling basically uniform, now today you can find King James Bibles, you compare one to the other, and you'll find a few words here and there that are spelled a little bit differently depending on which text they're using. And so I think we talked a little bit about that. So I'm not going to try to cover all the rules. If you want a list of all the rules, I can share those with you. Of course, they had all the rules. Actually, in practice, we don't know how closely they followed all of them in practice. Now, in a few minutes that I have left, I want to say something about the preface. I want to say a word about the foreword. So, the King James translators did write a preface to the reader. Most Bibles, King James Bibles, they don't print it. Not sure why, unless it's just because it's long and they don't think anybody's going to read it. I only have one Bible. I probably have 20 at least King James Bibles, different editions, And the only one I have is this one that has the translators to the readers. And one of the translators, named Miles Smith, he wrote this preface. And it's about 20 pages long. And in it, he explains about the criticism that they received for making a translation, which you can understand that, right? We live in a day and an age where when there's a new translation or a revision of the Bible made, there's all kinds of criticism about it. And they received the same criticism. Why do we need a new translation of the Bible? We have a long string of translations from Wycliffe on down. We looked at those last week. And so people were critical of them as well. Why do we need another one? And explaining what was their process, what was their thought process behind it. And if you, the preface can be very eye-opening. And if you're interested in the preface, I have one on my computer I'll print out for you. And it's got some explanatory words to help you update with updating the language. There's also this little book that's really good. It's called The Forgotten Preface. And in the back of it, it has the full preface in updated English. And then at the beginning of it, there's kind of a breakdown of the preface and with some commentary just explaining to you in about 10 different sections what it is that the translators are saying in the preface.
What exactly is a preface? Could you explain it to me? I'm not sure.
So it's like the introduction to the book. And so they're explaining why did we write this? What was our what was our purpose? How did we do it? What methods did we use? What was our philosophy behind it? And so they explain what resources did they use, because while they were making a revision of the Bishop's Bible, they do explain in their preface, hey, we did use the Hebrew, we used the Greek, we used the Septuagint, we used the Latin, we used other English translations, we even used the Douay-Rheims, the Catholic translation. We made use of all these translations. They explain in there how there's some words we didn't know for sure what they meant. And so we put one word in the translation, we put the other word in the margin. And so they give their defense for why they have alternate translations in the margin. Now, they didn't do marginal notes because King James said, I don't want marginal notes. But they did put alternate translations in the margin, as you would see in the samples I passed around. There's a lot of explanation in the preface of what their thought process was, and I could say a lot about it that you probably don't care about it because you're not probably near as nerdy about it as I am. But if you are, I'll loan you my book. So, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
The word Catholic, spelled with a small c, the word Catholic means universal.
Yes?
How did the Catholic Church, come to use that name? Is that supposed to mean a universal church?
Yeah, that I'm not sure about, how that came about. Yes, Miss Judy?
Can you give us a short answer for people that say can't believe in the Bible because there's too many versions?
So there's a difference between a translation and a version, but you can a translation that is faithful to the original is a good translation. And the reason that they're different is because one is which underlying text are they using to translate from, which that can get complicated for people. but also, are they translating it for the what is their goal, and who are the people that they're translating for? What people group? So you're translating it into English, but what is your target audience that they're translating for? And are they trying to make a more word-for-word translation or a more thought-for-thought translation? So, for example, if there were two people in here that spoke Spanish, are there two people in here that speak Spanish fluently? No? Okay, so imagine that there's two people in here that speak Spanish. And I write a document, I write a letter in English, and I give it to them to translate it into Spanish for their family. They're not going to match. If I have those two people translate it and rewrite it into Spanish, it's not going to be the same. But it's still going to be what I said. Pardon?
It says the same thing.
It says the same thing, even
Tell them the same thing.
right. Even though they're not going to be the same, it's still going to be what I said. But I don't know if that's helpful. So, like an example in the Bible is when in Esther, when King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, when he sent out the decree into all the land, that the first decree was about that on a certain day all the Jews were going to be killed, and then later on he sent out the decree that on that day all the Jews could defend themselves. And he had to send it, it had to be translated into different languages according to the different provinces that he ruled over. And in all those different provinces, however it was translated, it was still his words. Whether they did a great job of translating it or a poor job of translating it, it was still the king's words. And they had to obey it. And it meant the same thing.
I like that.
And so likewise today, when it's translated by faithful people who are translating from the original language, then you have a good translation, which we're going to talk about next week, because we're going to talk about the modern translations next week and try to answer the question, how do I know whether I can trust these or not? Is there a bad translation? Is there such a thing as a bad translation? Miss Weir? You had your hand up?
Joe always said it had to be the authorized King James Version, 1611 edition. And I was wondering your response to that, because it doesn't really seem that's exactly what we're reading right?
No, it's not. I mean, it was authorized insofar as he said you can make a translation.
So I'm just wondering why you let him get away with that.
Because it's not worth arguing over. Because I'm probably not gonna change his mind, right? I can talk about him now, right? I'm not gonna change his mind. There's no sense in arguing over it and trying to, because some people would be obnoxious about it, and get a 1611 like wherever that page is and say, okay, here, fine, read this, right? I'm not trying to be obnoxious with somebody and say, here, okay, fine, here's a 1611, if that's what you want to use. Read that. No, we use the 1769 or whatever I said, edition that has updated spelling that, Greg?
I was just going to say, we all run into people like Miss Judy gave and sometimes you just got to confront the person and say, are you just looking for a reason not to believe in God? Is that what the issue is? Because there's lots of them. There's lots of reasons why you can come up with excuses not to believe in God. That's kind of the root of that, you know what I mean? they're getting nitpicky, and even if Miss Judy answers their question, they'll just find some other reason. So
Just have to tell them to seek and they'll find.
Right. Sometimes that's the case. James?
That's what I like about the Bible app. You can go to a King James, and you can read, in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was God. And you can go to NASB, you can go to NIV, you can go to these other ones.
Yes. Yes. And we're going to say more about that next week. Yes, ma'am?
It kind of comes down to if they're reading God's word. Is it right out of the translation? They're getting it in.
Yes. So the best translation is the one that you read. So, okay, we got everybody's. Uh-huh. 5, 4, 3. Really? James, are you going back there, James? Are you going back there? And so, you remember when we talked about doing translations for other people groups, that sometimes they have a person who's native to that group, and they cooperate with the translator, and the translator will tell them, does this make sense? And they'll say, well, yes, it makes sense, but that's not how we would say it.
They're not talking about
Right.
groups. They're talking about the multiple versions in English.
But even in English as a people group, sometimes, like even in King James, the King James, for many people, it makes sense, but that's still not how you would say it today. Right? That's not how I talk today. It's like Brother Tony talks about people who, what happens to people, some people when they start to pray, suddenly they start to pray in King James. That's weird. You don't talk like that normal. No, we don't talk like that. All right. You didn't put your name in there, right? Okay, Brother Tony, pick us out a winner. Oh, you're going to make me read it? James.
Hey, I stirred them up. And got that off.
Right on. Cool.
All right. Congratulations. Okay. We're going to have a runner-up. We're going to do a runner-up. So pick one, and I'm going to give away that 1650 page. Where is it?
I think it's on the back table.
It's on the back table. Okay.
Oh, is it in a frame?
Yes? Oh, it's in. Oh. You drew two names. You can't draw it. Separate. You need to separate them. Yeah, you can't win twice, James. Yes, it's true.
Really?
Yes.
I only put 20 in there.
That one says James, we're taking your page back.
That's right. This one says that is just weird. Okay, Lord, what do you
Bruce. No, Bruce gets this one. That one right there. All right. Okay. Well, we're 7 minutes over. Next Wednesday night is the last Wednesday night that you have to put up with me, and we'll talk about the modern translations. And so if you have any questions about that, let me know. Thank you so much. You are dismissed.